Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Lead Scoring in Marketo Engage, how to identify and close your best leads. So let's get started. I'll introduce myself. I'm James Fletcher. I'm the CEO and a Marketo Solutions Architect here at JTF Marketing. I'll be taking you through most of the content today. We'll be looking at some examples of why lead scoring models don't work. Importantly, how you can prioritize and route your leads correctly within Marketo Engage. Lead scoring model types in Marketo Engage, because there's multiple ways to skin a cat. And how can you actually use this in a sales capacity? What does it mean? How do we apply it to make sure that we are gaining knowledge and insights from lead scoring? And finally, we'll look at what is best practice lead scoring and what does that look like for you, because it may be different to how it looks for my business. So for those of you who aren't aware, and it's your first webinar with JTF Marketing, we are a specialist Marketo Engage partner. We focus on maximizing your investment in Marketo and enabling you to do all the cool things that you want it to do, all the things you thought it might do. And importantly, we will help you maximize it through various different use cases. So whether it's technical implementation, whether you start your journey, or whether you're looking for a longer term partner to help you build maturity over time. So you'll see some logos on here of clients that we work with, and it could be one of yours on there as well. If you would like to talk to us about any of our services, feel free to be in touch after this presentation. So let's talk about lead scoring and why doesn't it work. Probably the number one reason lead scoring doesn't work is because you've built it. You've tried to build it, you've configured it in such a way in Marketo, and then you've left it. Maybe you've moved on, maybe you've tried something new, or maybe you've even updated it. As you can see from the screenshot and the example, this was created in 2018 and then later updated in 2020. We are now 2022, so maybe it's about time that this particular client would update this lead scoring model. But it generally still doesn't work, right? The pain is still there. Lead scoring isn't quite hitting the mark. We're not getting the quality we expected. Forget it. It's just going to be sales nagging us to try and get this lead scoring model to work. And I'm sure you're familiar with that anyway. The second reason, which is most common, is missing data points. So you may not be collecting the data that you are wishing to score. And this is so common, it's quite surprising, because often we'll say, oh, we want to score on job title. Okay, is it on your lead generation forms? No. Okay, well, how are you going to score on it? Yeah, so when do you collect these data points? Think about when you're collecting the data points, when they're getting added into Marketo, and if they are at a point where it's valuable to score them. Often what I see, and a lot of the analysis that we do as consultants, we see that these data points come in later on. So you're actually in the sales process already. It's already been assigned to someone. Therefore, you've got to fill in the gaps later on. Whether that happens, again, we can have a conversation about how great salespeople are with lead scoring later on. Ultimately, what we've got to think about is, when do we collect the data? Is it valuable to score on? Or can we enrich it from other places? And that might help us overcome this challenge of not collecting the data points that we are scoring on. The next one, which I see quite often, is the objective has shifted. And of course, in today's times where we have pandemics, war, rising inflation, interest rates going crazy, they can all impact everything we do in marketing, whether it's reducing our budgets, changing our sales cycles, delaying sales even, or maybe we get absolutely new markets emerging. The likes of the pandemic created new markets for many people. And maybe there's even shifts in buyer behavior where people would typically meet in person at trade shows, and now they no longer. They're online, they're doing digital activities. So this objective piece is pretty critical, because actually if we don't understand what we're trying to achieve from the lead scoring model, it can get lost pretty quickly. And often what I hear from a lot of the clients that we work with is, oh, I want to just prioritize the leads. I want to send all the leads over with a certain threshold. Actually, you may not need to do that. Another reason lead scoring fails is because sales don't use it. And they're generally not that worried at the time when we launch lead scoring. They talk about wanting lead scoring because they've heard the industry talk about prioritization and lead scoring. But ultimately, they're not that interested at the time we're launching it from a marketing perspective. It may have even been launched without the support of sales. Therefore, they're disengaged from day one. and they start to forget why it was important to them in the first place. And therefore, you've got to keep training, keep educating, keep engaging regarding lead scoring. And there's something that goes hand in hand with lead scoring, which is interesting moments. And we're putting together a guide at the moment for interesting moments. But if you'd like a sneak preview, let me know and we can pick up a conversation. Again, how do we translate this numbers, this data into something meaningful for a salesperson? If we think about the salesperson, they're actually interested in which product should we be talking about? How do I engage them? What might it look like? Or how do I translate this into a sales conversation or to prompt a sales conversation even? The other reason we see that lead scoring doesn't work is duplicates. So 25% of instances that we generally see, 25% of the databases of the instances that we review typically have duplicates within the database. And it's quite a large percentage, right? So we've got to look at what happens to the data when we've got split records, when we've got intelligence split across multiple records. Maybe it's 2 records, maybe it's 3 records. What is causing these duplicates and how do we merge them together in an automated fashion? And importantly, and dare I raise the question, GDPR, data legislations, regulations, how do we make sure that we are compliant with the laws in our various regions? Of course, if you've got split data, split intelligence, if you're scoring on clicks or views or page visits, whatever it might be, again, you're going to have a split lead score, which will not be accurate based on what you are looking to track. And therefore, you might not be prioritizing the right people. And this is really common, by the way, when you see James.Fletcher, a James, a JF, or a J.Fletcher in the email construction based on wherever you get your data from. So if you're using a data broker, be careful with that. Look for some fuzzy matches and make sure that you're clearing those down as well. The final reason, and this is one I love personally because I'm not a massive fan of lead scoring, which I will put out there straight away, is that you actually don't need lead scoring. And it sounds really crazy to say, but there's kind of a cult behind we've got to get lead scoring in place. We need lead scoring. We need to deploy it to our business. But actually, when you start running the numbers, it doesn't make any sense. So I often talk about lead volumes. Do you have a lead volume that you cannot control or follow up every single lead? You can only work that out based on your sales team or your business development team or your telesales team or telemarketing team. Can they handle that amount of leads? So if you get 50 leads a day and you've got 5 salespeople, that's 10 leads each per day. They've got time to engage with 10 leads per day easily. Of course, that builds up over time. So what we've got to look at is actually how many can they handle over the course of a month, for example, and how long do we hang on to those leads and how do we bring them back to nurture? And you'll hear that quite often in the world of automation, talking about bringing back to nurture. So how many times do we attempt to engage them before we push it back? You may also operate in a niche market or have a limited audience. And so often I talk about this from the concept of Marketo as a great example. We know that most of you on this webinar have Marketo. We are targeting companies who have Marketo because that's where we specialize. We operate within that market. Therefore, actually, if we can identify those people using data points outside of the business, so let's say, crawling software that identifies that your website has Marketo deployed, we can then start to look and identify the right people using various tools, data collection tools, LinkedIn, whatever it might be, outbound engagement, lead generation specific to you through LinkedIn ads, for example, again, to draw you back to our marketing material. So if you're in a niche market, it doesn't make any sense to you. Finally, the fourth one is your data collection and MQL criteria is accurate. So marketing qualified leads, for those who are not familiar with MQL, often we talk about getting more MQLs in front of sales and more SQLs created. Now, if your data collection is on point and your data hygiene is correct, you will not need to worry about lead scoring because the people who engage, the way you measure how they engage, will indicate whether you need to follow up with them or not, or pass them over to a sales rep. Again, there's a balance here. Some of you may agree or disagree with this, and I'm happy to see that in any Q&A or comments. Feel free to fire them through. But often this is a conversation I have with a lot of our customers. You don't need lead scoring right now. You're not generating enough volume to warrant a lead scoring or prioritization model. So let's talk about one of the most common themes that are confused when we start talking about lead scoring, lead routing and lead scoring. Now, for those of you who are aware, I'm a massive fan of Marketo, first of all, and also a massive fan of a platform called Chili Piper, which does some lead routing. Now, the reason these two often get intertwined and confused is because when we think about lead scoring, we think about assigning it to a specific person. Now, I'm here to tell you, please do not combine them, because you're going to make your life much harder within Marketo. It's harder to manage, it's harder to scale, but ultimately, let's get the definitions right. Lead scoring is the ability to identify those contacts within your database and prioritize them based on behavior. From a lead routing perspective, this is who am I going to send it to in order to engage in a conversation as soon as possible in order not to impact the sale. Again, the faster time to sale will improve our conversion rates overall. And that's what we should really be worrying about, is how long does it take us for someone who says, I want a conversation, to have that conversation. So I've seen some questions come in, and I'll come back to them at the end around thresholds and stuff like that. Let's talk about the options for building lead scoring in Marketo Engage. Now, there is many ways in which we can do this, and sometimes frustratingly so, because there's no out-of-the-box, easy-to-use structure. So the first one, and this is probably what you may all be familiar with on the call, is a standard lead scoring program. So we build a big program, we've got lots of smart campaigns within it, whether it's behavioral, demographic, maybe you've got point of interest scoring, or product of interest scoring, where you might align specific scores to specific products. Again, that's possible in Marketo, and build as many scores as you like. And the pros to this is it's an operational default program. It's very easy to identify what every single step is doing, because we have a nice long list on the left-hand side, and it's applied globally. So it's looking very broad brush. If someone clicks an email or visits one of these pages, give them a score. However, the cons of this are, it's a lot of updating, If you decide, oh, actually, we don't want to score that page anymore as a 15 points, it's going to be 5, or it's going to be whatever. You've now got to go through and update every single one of these, which takes quite a lot of time. Of course, lots of trigger campaigns impact the performance of Marketo. And if you didn't know that, every 6 months, Marketo will cull all of the smart campaigns, trigger-based, that have not run within the last 6 months. So they will clear them down and stop them from running, and that may impact your reporting. So it's important, again, to look at this in the context of, if people are not engaging with this lead scores that you've set up, or it's once every now and then we've got to make sure that we're monitoring those as well. And this little red bell up on the right-hand side is the alerts. You can subscribe to those smart campaigns being disabled within there as well. So it's really important. So it's a good way to get started. I'm not saying it's not a great method, but what we need to be careful of is, how do we manage that on an ongoing basis, and what does it look like? The next one, which you may have heard of, is something called a tokenized lead scoring model. And this is quite common across people who've been using Marketo for some time, familiar with tokens. If you don't know what a token is, it's a variable that can be applied at a folder or program level, which then can be used in multiple places. So imagine it a bit like a mail merge token. You're using those to put in the first name in every place that it says, "Hi, James," for example. Now, these are brilliant, again, because it reduces the amount of time required in order to manage lead scoring. Why? Because, again, I'm using a high, medium, low score here for my negative and my positives. And again, I can build in my criteria related to those specific smart campaigns. Again, everything comes back to conditions, right? So when we're talking about building a lead scoring model, we've got to map out what those conditions are and map out what do we want to score and when. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on. Again, these are applied globally, so it means it applies to everything. It's very easy to deploy, but again, you've got multiple trigger campaigns and they will deactivate. So they're more or less the same thing. This one's a little bit quicker to update should you need to pivot your lead scoring model. Next is our in-program lead scoring model. Now, what does this mean? It means where you're using progression statuses, which if you're not, I'm coming for you. It's going to kill your reporting. We've got a great webinar on reporting that you should go and watch, which is why progression statuses are really important. So if someone clicks my email, update the progression statuses on my campaign, my program, which allows me to see the results at a high level perspective and ROI. So within this in-program lead scoring model, we're building it into our trigger-based campaigns, i.e. in this example we see on the screen, someone has filled out a form, and then we're going through and adding in the change score, the send alert, etc. Now, you may hear some people say that that's not best practice, and it's not. But you may find it easier when you're building and launching campaigns to be then specific. And I use the example always of content marketing. When you create an asset, you will know whether it's a high value, low value, or medium value. What you've then got to decide based on its performance is whether you're going to change that to be a high value piece of content, maybe from a low because you're seeing a market shift or it's getting a lot of traction. Therefore, you're going to score it higher and give higher points. Again, you'll see in this example, I'm only using behavioral score. And in this example, we're using very good quality data. Therefore, the only thing we're interested in behavior. We know they're the right people, so we don't need to score a job title, etc. We're actually only interested in what behavior do you have, which tells us that you're ready to buy. Now, there's positives around this structure of the model, which again is it's combining all the logic together. You can amend it on the fly, as I say, if you're looking at different content types. Again, you can score those differently. They're aligned to your program statuses as well. So program success will then be aligned with the score. So if you're reaching a registration on a webinar or a download or a filled out a form, whatever it might be, again, you're attributing a score correctly. So often I talk to clients about this in the context of webinar follow-ups, for example. People who have attended, what score should we give them? But we want sales to contact everybody and ask them what their feedback was in the webinar. Great. If you want to do that, you're going to have to change the score. It's going to be has to be a score that will take you over the threshold if you have a threshold set, or it will push someone through the prioritization. Now, the cons to this model, of course, is that it's a bit more advanced, it's a bit more involved, but if you're using program templates within Marketo Engage, you'll find this much easier because you're cloning, you're deploying, it's integrated to the way that you execute campaigns. But there is one thing you've got to be careful of is that tokens can be overridden. So where we have a token here that says positive high, if I change this in my resources and downloads folder, for example, where a high is 100 points, but maybe a low is 10, then that will obviously update for any new people qualifying for those campaigns as well. So do bear that in mind. I've got a duplicate here at the bottom. So the big question is, how do we build and maintain a best practice lead scoring model? And my million-dollar question, if my presentation keeps up with me, is this. There's a few different components to lead scoring. And so it's not as easy as just build a bunch of smart campaigns and wing it out and hope that it works. What we've really got to do is start from the customer journey. So again, think about where are we collecting those data points and at which part along the customer journey. We've got a customer journey mapping document that you can download from the website, which will help you map out the data points as well as those milestones. So what are those sales cycles that we're going through? Where do we collect the data? If your form is conversion rate best practice, you will be collecting first name, last name, email address probably. You then might want to look at data enrichment tools, again, to fill in any of the gaps that you then need in order to score correctly. We then have to start thinking about our weighted scoring model. So I haven't talked about this throughout the year, but you'll see that I'm constantly using high, medium, low, because we will have blog posts that are high value or videos that are medium value, and we've got to score those differently. So think about that and the structure and how you define it. And there's a spreadsheet which I can share with you after this, which will help you map those out and give you some detail to, okay, what does that look like? How do I map it out? which will then help you make a decision around how you best deploy. The other thing we've also got to bear in mind is always negative scoring, because it's great adding 10, adding 15, adding 20, adding 50, etc., etc., etc. But what we've also got to think about is this is all in the moment. But if the moment passes and that person then starts to drift away and doesn't engage, what do we do with that individual? But again, this is where we talk about data hygiene and keeping the data up to date. So often I will see people with lead scoring in place and saying that it doesn't work because they've got a massive lead score for someone, but they're no longer with the business. Well, that tells me you haven't collected the feedback from Marketo and the email campaigns and fed it back into the system to say this person's left, therefore mark them as non-marketable contacts. Again, I think you've got to make sure that you are aligned to your business objective. What are you trying to achieve in this lead scoring model? And I typically see two kind of paths. One is I just want to feed leads through to my sales team. Personally, I hate that approach. The second is I've got an area where I'm trying to grow the business, a new product I'm launching, therefore I want to promote that heavier. Or we've seen a market shift. Pandemic was a great example where all of a sudden we have more demand for this product, therefore we've got to get these leads to people quicker than any of the others. So where you're successful in a market, you will pull the scores back a little bit, and where you're looking to gain more traction in the market, you will push those forward with a higher score. So you've also got to think about that. So again, that's where the win-loss data comes in to justify how you're building the model. And you're already probably all sitting there thinking, God, this is a bit more complicated than I thought. It really is, because to get it right means constant optimization, more data points that you can bring in, the better, especially from an engagement perspective. So we've got some clients using Octopus for social lead scoring, as well as the interactions in Salesforce. So bringing in interactions into Marketo, using them from the Salesforce activity log to see an appointment's been had with a salesperson, an email's gone out, a phone call's been made, a note's been added. So you can start to filter that data and potentially score on that as well. You can also start to get into sentiment scoring if you really wanted to, but that's another level as well. Finally, the big thing is review it often. You've got to keep looking at it. You've got to keep analyzing. There's no too often for me when it comes to lead scoring. I think you've got to look at how many did we get? Is it worth a review? Where did they get to? So you've got to dedicate time to review those and make sure that they are successful. Otherwise, you end up in this same old cycle of I've built it, I've modified it, I've forgotten it, I've built it again, I've edited it again, and it's still not working. And I think it's really, really important that you just get that viewpoint of this isn't a build it once and then leave it. It is a constant optimization, much like an engagement program in Marketo. You don't build it and just leave it. So before I go into some of the questions, and I see there's more questions coming through, how can we help you? You've probably got a sense by now that we do this quite a lot. And also we spend our lives in Marketo and understand what best practice is for your business. And it will differ, right? We talk about industry best practice and what works for everybody in a general scenario, but depending on the nuances of your business and the way that you like to work, there may be a slightly different best practice. My opinion is often we want to build everything into program templates to make the ease of launching campaign as simple as possible, and integrating reporting, lead scoring, optimizations, etc., where we can. So my team at JTF Marketing are able to support you in not only designing this model or reviewing an existing model, but importantly, being able to help you test it, build it, verify that it's going to work before it goes live. And again, keeping that engagement in place with sales is also pretty critical, because again, we can talk about Marketo Sales Insight and how that integrates and what does that mean from a sales perspective. And that's the ongoing education and knowledge piece that I'm talking about that we need to think about as well, and how do we maximize the investment in the lead scoring model. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon on the next webinar.